All right, I've got some thoughts on the Uncharted movie. But first, a little bit of background. Uncharted is probably my favorite video game franchise of all time. I mean, top three for sure. I've loved these characters and these games pretty much since they were first coming out. And I was excited for the movie. I mean, even way back, 10 years ago when there were first whispers about the workings of an Uncharted movie being thought about and pre-production and things like that, which fell through time and time again. I was definitely excited. I was definitely someone who wanted an Uncharted movie. However, a few months ago, after seeing the trailers for this upcoming film, my excitement quickly waned, and I just, my heart wasn't in it. I wasn't planning on paying money to go see it in theaters. But enter my friend Tyler, who knows about my love for Uncharted, and he had a different opinion. He thought that I needed to see the movie and that I needed to tell him my thoughts on it, which is why this video is happening. So he was kind enough to buy me a ticket for opening night last Thursday. And so I went and saw the Uncharted movie. And, I've got a lot of thoughts, both good and bad. I gotta say, just overall, it was not as bad as I was anticipating. But I also had to get myself into a certain mindset going in, having low expectations and trying to remove myself from the confines of the game franchise, of the characters and the canon that was already established. I had to go in knowing that very likely, a lot of things that were, true to the story were not going to make it into the film. And I was right in a lot of ways. So I gotta say, I don't even know how to put it. I have so many thoughts bouncing around in my head. Breaking this down from the point of view first of, somebody maybe who has never played an Uncharted game. Didn't even know that Uncharted was a game series or was vaguely aware and went and saw the film because Tom Holland, right? He's the big it actor right now. It's his next movie. Okay, it's an action treasure hunting. Cool, Tom Holland in an Indiana Jones like thing. Let's go see it. Through that lens is probably how the movie is best viewed, because you don't have these preconceived notions of what these characters are supposed to look like or how they're supposed to act like or how the plot is supposed to unfold. That being said, it's still a flawed movie from the point of view of it just being an action adventure. The plot can be all over the place. When it gets away from, the canon of the games, but then tries to throw in a reference, you're going to be lost if you don't all of a sudden get that reference. So I think it would still be difficult viewing for somebody who didn't know what Uncharted was. Now, for the casual viewer who maybe understands a little bit more about Uncharted and has maybe played one or two games or watched somebody play a game, they're probably going to be confused because you don't have the whole story of the game franchise. You just have bits and pieces, and those bits and pieces don't necessarily fit into what you're seeing on screen. So again, it can be a bit of a jarring experience with the way that the movie kind of meanders its plot. I mean, there is a lot that they pack into a movie that isn't even 2 hours long. This movie's an hour and 50 some odd minutes, which I was shocked, and so trying to follow the plot would be difficult. But then people like me, people who have played all the games, understand the characters, know the plot points, from the different stories throughout the franchise, can pick out where the movie is pulling from the games and identify what it's paving as unique. And that still doesn't make the movie work, though, because you're looking at it and going, okay, so this, what I'm seeing right now, this is from Uncharted 3, okay. And then later on, okay, now we've got something from Uncharted 4. But how we got from this Uncharted 3 plot pick, to this Uncharted 4 moment doesn't make sense or doesn't necessarily connect within the confines of what you know from those games, because the games are all very different plots with very different characters, other than the characters, of course, that carry on throughout the franchise, like Nate and Sully, of course. But my goodness, like, I just felt like this whole film I was being thrown all over the place. Now, to get into more specifics, that's kind of the film as a whole. But to dive into the movie itself, let's start with Tom Holland as Nathan Drake, right? The main character of the Uncharted franchise, Nathan Drake. Obviously, Tom Holland, being cast was a play by Sony through contracts or whatever, and getting somebody into this role that was really popular and really going to be recognizable and would bring their own set of fans to the movie regardless of video game fans, right? So I'm not saying it was a bad choice. Like, I understand why it ended up being Tom Holland, and I like Tom Holland in most of what he does. But he's not Nathan Drake. Not as we understand Nathan Drake to be. But before I go any further with that, I do want to say that these are actors, right? I'm not expecting these people to be the video game character, right? I'm breaking this down extra far because I want to get into it for Tyler and throw, these feelings and things. But these are my opinions, Tom Holland did fine as Nathan Drake. I mean, an on-screen interpretation of the character, he did fine. He did fine. I'm just being nitpicky because I want to. This is my video, so I'm going to nitpick. And he is portraying a much younger Nathan Drake than what you see in the games. And so you could say, okay, well then this can be a prequel to the canon of the franchise, right? This is just a younger Nate where we're seeing these things. Well, the issue is, throughout the games, you explore many moments from a young Nathan Drake's life, including how he meets Sully and his relationship with his brother, Sam. And so this movie does not tie very well into those pre-established early Nathan Drake moments. This is paving its own young Nathan Drake, right? But still, again, pulling in bits and pieces to tie to, what you're familiar with. The reason I think just doing this as a young Nathan Drake doesn't work in the context of this film's plot is because, like I said earlier, the plot still tries to pull in these moments from the games, like falling out of the back of the airplane or finding, the ships in a cave, but they're changing the settings or they're changing the reasons why you're there. And so it'd be one thing to have a completely unique plot line that is just, this is Nathan Drake before you see him in the games. Therefore, we're not going to copy moments from the games because those happen later on in his life, right? But instead, you have an earlier Nathan Drake, but then he's reliving these moments out of context so it disconnects the character from the franchise. So then you say, okay, well then maybe this isn't trying to fit in with the games. It's establishing a new canon. That's fine. But by picking from all of these different moments throughout the game franchise, I feel like you're almost limiting the references that you can make down the road should they decide to make more Uncharted movies. You're limiting yourself on what you can pull from by having these throwaway moments that just as easily could have been their own unique action sequences or just, I don't know, it could have been different, right? You could have just written a different story. Tom Holland's version of Nathan Drake, it's hard to get a gauge on what age he's supposed to be. You do get some flashbacks with him and his brother Sam in the orphanage. They stick with that whole thing pretty much how it was in the beginning of Uncharted 4. But by the time we see Tom Holland as Nathan Drake and not just a little kid, playing young Nate, he's not any version of the character that we've really seen. He works a job at a bar. He doesn't really have fighting skills. I mean, you don't really see Nathan Drake fight in this movie, he gets thrown into a lot of sequences and he does his best, but, he's not trained, or he's not already living that life that you expect. He's kind of thrown into a lot of these situations for the first time, which again is fine if you're trying to explore his origins. But again, it keeps going back and forth on what he can do or what he can't do, and it's not really clear. How old is this Nathan Drake? What has he or hasn't he been exposed to before? We see, okay, he's got thieving skills, and but he has a job. He's waiting to hear from his brother Sam. He's not really going out and doing any like treasure hunting per se, but he's still super knowledgeable about all of the history and the treasure and the lore and the stories, just like he is in the game. So he's still like really educated, but he's not like really going out and doing anything until he meets Sully. So that brings me to Sully, right? So enough about Nathan for now. Let's talk about Sully. I was not happy when I heard that Mark Wahlberg was going to be playing Sully. Sully to me is this just super iconic character. I mean, even more so than Nathan Drake, he has a persona, right? I mean, he's this grumpy old man, big mustache, big guy. You can tell that he used to be the guy, right? The treasure hunter. And now he's older and he's got Nate and he does what he can. He can still hold his own, but he is frequently the reason why Nate ends up being alone, because Sully either makes a mistake or gets captured or can't continue onward, right? He's the old guy. Mark Wahlberg does not really portray that persona, which again, if you're saying, okay, but this is earlier on, so he's not as old yet. Well, in the games, we know exactly how Nate and Sully meet. That is, again, a flashback sequence that establishes how the two of them come together when Nate is a young boy down in South America. And so it's fine to ignore that canon from the game, but it's not really offering a meaningful substitute for why these two characters care about each other. And that's kind of ends up being a big part of the movie's plot, is why in the world, do we care about each other? Can we actually trust this guy? Can Nate actually trust Sully? But they still try to every now and then throw in but he's the old guy, right? There's like a line where Mark Wahlberg's like, oh, I'm not running on this ankle. And then in the next scene, he's in this like crazy fight, And so I feel like Mark Wahlberg's Sully is stuck between trying to be Nathan Drake in some scenes and trying to be Sully in other scenes. I mean, for very much of the movie, I feel like Mark Wahlberg is more Nathan Drake than Tom Holland. And that is, I was talking with Travis, before the movie came out, and he kind of had this interesting observation after watching the trailer. He said it was almost like years ago when they were trying to make this movie, they wanted Mark Wahlberg to be Nathan Drake. But now that it's been years and he's a little older, they still wanted him in the movie. So they just made him Sully and brought in Tom Holland as Nathan Drake. And after seeing the movie, I really do feel like that might hold some credence, because he goes back and forth between being the guy that, has the plan and does the fights and, blah, blah, and then to being the like backup guy that's like, oh, you go do this, or I need you to help me with this. And so it's kind of confusing again, getting a grasp on what Sully's role is supposed to be and what Nate's role is supposed to be within this plot. Now, that's a lot of negativity and nitpicking. Again, just my observations. But something that I did like was the introduction of Chloe and how she, meets and interacts first with with Nathan Drake. So I really thought that, the introduction of Chloe Fraser as a younger woman, to match Nathan Drake being a younger guy. The two of them had a very interesting, first encounter together where it's like, are we on the same side? Nate is over trusting, which is fine because throughout the franchise, Nathan Drake is always over trusting of women. That's kind of a thing, so that's fine. Right off the bat, Nate is trusting. Chloe, how does she fit in? Is she, friends with Sully? Is she against Sully? Is she now against Nate by default because of his affiliation with Sully? And you kind of see Nathan having to stumble into this world of backstabbing and intrigue and treasure hunting and trying to find his footing. That really worked, I think. But it was really only those few scenes, where they're in a dire situation where they have to work together and then she betrays him. And then, it's really only those few scenes where you really see that play out to its full potential. But because we don't really have a detailed story in the game franchise about Nate and Chloe's early relationship, I thought this was a decent substitute, that very easily could fit in well with their interactions later on in the events of the game franchise. And so I thought that was a much more compelling origin story than Nate and Sully. As for the plot itself, they're looking for Magellan's lost ship that supposedly had a bunch of treasure. So again, it's pulling from history, lost treasure. Do these ships exist or not? Or there's no doubt that the treasure existed at one point, but where is it now? And that tracks very well with kind of the plot of each of the games where they pick a civilization or they pick a specific treasure and then you're chasing down, the tools that lead to a clue, that solve a puzzle, so that overarching skeleton of a plot was there. And Magellan's ships were a decent, treasure for them to be chasing after. But the confusing thing is there wasn't, and again, I just chalked this up to the fact that the movie wasn't as long as it probably should have been, or at least could have been, is there's a lot of other parties interested in the treasure, or components of the treasure, like that jeweled cross or whatever that ended up just being a key. I don't even remember what it was called, but Antonio Banderas was all about that cross. I'm not even sure how aware of the rest of the treasure or the plot, or he was just obsessed with that one thing and then he dies. Okay. So it's just like trying to understand everybody's motivations here. When you're in a game, you have hours and hours and hours to learn and understand the motivations and desires of the villains and the side characters, and then how Nate and Sully have to respond to that. But you don't really get as much flushed out motivation in such a short period of time because so little screen time is dedicated just to flushing out those details. The screen time is all about what's going on with Nate and Sully. Which is fine in some scenes, but then, to the detriment of the overall plot in others. As for on-screen chemistry, regardless of Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland's, portrayal of these characters, regardless of how true their portrayal is to the source material, their on-screen chemistry with each other worked well. So, whenever the two of them were in a scene, they at least could work with each other, even if they weren't necessarily portraying Nate and Sully in the way that I would want to see Nate and Sully interact. Their characters and them as actors did interact well. Thank goodness, because, I personally don't think Mark Wahlberg is a very good actor, and I think, when Tom Holland has to do an American accent, he can't convey as much emotion. And he did a good job in Spider-Man being, a younger character, but Nathan Drake's not supposed to be in high school, so there needs to be a little bit more. He did a good job, but he could have brought a little more to the performance. But Mark Wahlberg could bring a little more to every performance. So what they had worked. They're on about the same level as each other, and so for the most part that worked okay. As for Nathan Drake's kind of key characteristics, he definitely had the wisecracking, but again to a much less degree than in the games. The writing overall for dialogue and jokes and it wasn't as crisp as it is in the games. And again, I just chalked that up to they wrote a 2-hour movie script as opposed to a 4 10-hour sagas where you can really get into exploring different facets of the character, right? So maybe down the road. Oh, something that I just remembered that I totally forgot that totally drove me crazy though was that Sully didn't even have a mustache. There was no mustache. Now, after the credits scene, now Mark Wahlberg has a mustache. Okay, whoa, that's how Sully got his mustache, huh? All right, he decided to just grow it on a whim, and now he has a mustache. I think that's something that really should have been there from the beginning. I mean, it's really part of the persona. I mean, he didn't have to be swearing and smoking cigars all the time as much as that's like part of the character, a pretty big part of the character, but at least do the Hawaiian shirt and the mustache, man. I mean, come on. That should have been bare minimum. And not just an after the credits like, oh, look, now he looks like Sully. Maybe if there's ever another movie. I don't know. Speaking of questionable writing, I mentioned earlier that Nate's older brother, Sam, is kind of in the movie, right? Which, again, that's fine, because as we know, within the context of the games, they were in an orphanage together. Sam left when he was old enough, said he'd come back for Nate, never comes back. You find out in game 4 that he was in prison and, all this. But in this one, Sam is gone, but he's been sending Nate postcards for years. And these really gut-wrenching, emotional, like, sorry I'm not there, I wish I could do this for... No. These postcards here, I wrote this down because I needed to make sure that I remembered word for word this very detailed description. Ah, yes. In a very heartfelt scene where Tom Holland is staring sadly at one of these postcards, you hear a gentle voiceover of Sam's voice say, "Wish I were there, bro." Like, what? That somebody was like, yeah, that's what two brothers who haven't seen each other in 10 years write on a postcard. Wish I were there, bro. And the voiceover and Tom Holland, I mean, that scene, it was a joke. If that was supposed to make me feel for Nathan Drake and understand that his motivation of going out into this dangerous world was because he needed to find Sam, which that was supposed to be one of the key motivations, though that, for every scene that was brought up, it was totally forgotten in the next scene. So to have these postcards, which end up being a puzzle with invisible ink and a key plot point later, but, in this scene, this was supposed to be a point where the audience connects with Nathan Drake, and it totally falls flat because of the cheesy voiceover with this ridiculously boring, bland, I wish I was there, bro, writing. And there's like 20 postcards or whatever that he carries around with him. And so that was ridiculous. Now, not to say that the Uncharted games don't have ridiculous moments. I mean, that's part of it, right? Is that you have these action sequences and things that are just so over the top. You're like, what is happening? This entire thing is, the city is crumbling and you're running. But this movie, I feel like, blows all that out of the water. as soon as you get to, the end where you find Magellan's ships, which are in this cave, and it's like reminiscent of the ship in Libertalia in Uncharted 4, and you're like, wow, it's cool. And then you go, wait, he swam under the water and they're in this cavern that's open to the sky, but how the hell did these two massive ships get in this cave? How'd the ships even get there? Okay, so besides that, they find the gold. Woo, all right, awesome. Magellan's treasure is real. Let's start stuffing it in our pockets. Oh no, the bad guys are here. Because they saw you drive by on a boat while they were just standing on the beach because you didn't even try to be subtle and you somehow didn't see all the bad guys watching you standing on the beach. Also, where did you get a boat? So, yeah, naturally the bad guys show up. I can't even remember the girl's name that betrayed him because that's how much I cared about the villain in this movie. But so they show up and they're like, all right, Magellan's ships are here. Which, how'd they know that? They were just following. They were just following Nathan Drake, right? They knew they were looking for the treasure. They knew the ships were lost. There was no indication that the treasure was going to be on the ships. And yet they're totally prepared for what they have to do when you accidentally stumble across two Spanish galleons or Italian, I don't even know Magellan, that guy. I should know, I love history. These ships that are in there, they show up and the 6 bad guys pull out shovels and start digging. And I'm like, what are they doing? And then a helicopter comes over and they somehow get the ropes underneath the ship attached to the helicopter so that they can raise the frickin' ships up out of this cave with one helicopter? Obviously it's like Minecraft rules, right? Where you dig underneath and then it just stays above and then there's open space underneath so you can attach the ropes. How else was that going to work? I don't understand. 6 guys with shovels, these 2 massive ships. And, thank goodness they had that helicopter. If they had the helicopter, then why were they just standing on the beach? They could have just been flying around trying to see something. I don't know. So now the ships are flying through the air, being swung beneath these 2 cargo helicopters. One ship per helicopter, and Nate and Sully are trapped on one of them. Well, thank goodness that none of the wood on those ships has rotted in 500 years. The masts, the sails, they're all there. There's literally just 2 ropes underneath the hull. But the ships are perfectly intact. No big deal. With $4 billion worth of gold on board. So never mind how much that weighs, right? So then there's this insane fight sequence where, again, Nathan Drake doesn't really fight because he can't fight. But thank goodness Sully can until he steals one of the helicopters. Which I appreciated because at least canonically, Sully is a pilot. Anytime there's any kind of plane or whatever, Sully's your guy. So I was like, okay, fine. Sully's got the helicopter. I can appreciate it. And then somehow the bad guy falls off the helicopter and Nathan Drake fires a cannon at the other helicopter and they drop the ship and the ship lands on the bad lady and she dies. And then this Spanish ship or whatever, this big ship falls from the sky and lands in the ocean, does not break. And there's this scene where the sails unfurl in the wind and it starts sailing like everything's fine, all on its own. And what's Nathan's line? Can't put a price on that. To which Sully says, yeah, you can. About $4 billion. And then the ship sinks. And that's my notes. Those are the 2 quotes I wrote down because after that I was done. Oh man, I can understand the cheese, but just when moments like that fall flat, and nobody laughs for the right reasons. There's like that awkward laugh after the fact where people are like, oh, that was just real. Which I feel like that didn't even happen because Tyler, you bought me a ticket for like the second showing on opening night of this movie. And there were literally 6 other people in the whole theater. I mean, like, nobody went to this movie, at least where I was, you know. So supposedly it actually had a really good opening weekend. I was hearing that it did quite well, better than people were expecting. But like I said, you know, objectively overall, it could have been a lot worse. I'm just really getting into it. But, man. So, just like every game, they walk away with like 3 pieces of the treasure and just go, oh, well, at least we didn't die. Time to go home. And then you get this post-credit scene. And this post-credit scene, or mid-credit scene, whatever you want to call it, this was more Uncharted. This like 2-minute sequence was more Uncharted than the entire movie. You've got this dude from Game of Thrones, I can't even remember his name. He's got an eye patch, he's sitting on a table, he's got a gun, they're somewhere in like South America. Nathan Drake is there. You know, he dupes the guy, you know, sleight of hand. Sully comes in with his big old magnum. He's got the mustache, he's got the Hawaiian shirt. The guy that thinks that he just played them just got played by them, and they're on their way with whatever treasure they're hunting. You know, they're on their way. And that one scene, I was like, that's Uncharted. Why wasn't that the movie? Why wasn't whatever adventure they're on here, with whatever dynamic the two of them have going, playing schemes and stuff on these guys, why wasn't that the movie? Which leads me to believe that they intend there to be a sequel, and this was simply just supposed to be an introduction. So now, as much as I wasn't excited for this movie, I'm going to be even more mad if there's not a sequel to play out, because I feel like they showed their potential, but it wasn't quite there. Speaking of not showing potential, the soundtrack to this movie was generic movie guitar. Very bland, especially compared to the music of the game franchise. And mind you, this is a Sony production movie. They didn't sell the rights to some other studio. I mean, literally, this is like a new thing. Sony's movies, you know, the PlayStation, like, you know, how Marvel movies at the beginning have like their Marvel crawl, you know, this had a PlayStation one, like, this was literally like a Sony PlayStation film. And they didn't use the epic music that is so associated with these characters and this franchise. There's one scene where Nate puts on the like gun vest thing, right? And it plays a small little like adaptation of the main Uncharted theme to be like, this is the moment where he becomes Nathan Drake. But it's just like very subtle and very short. And that's like the only recognizable music that I picked out until the credits, where it starts right up with the main theme from the games, and then all the credits long is this epic sequence of songs from the Uncharted games. And I'm like, well, obviously they had the rights to them. This was Sony, and it's right there in the credits, and they should have been using these epic scores throughout the film to bolster these lackluster sequences. I feel like, you know, some of these scenes could have been perceived, at least by me, a little better if it had a better score. If it had some music to really like get you in the zone. So I was gonna say that's all, but it's not. I'm thinking of all these random things now that are so out of order. That's as cohesive as a conversation that I could have. Now I'm just going to start naming off random things that drove me crazy. There's a cat now. Sully has a cat. Nate's like, I need like this, and a cat, and I can do this heist for you. And then it's like, what's the cat for? Oh, it's for you. I thought you were super sad. And then now Sully carries this cat around in a backpack. Like, what? Okay. Interesting, I guess. Except they didn't really get into it too much. It was just kind of there and then not there and then there again. Again, they try to play up the whole Sully being the old man with, like, he can't use phones or technology or his ankle hurts. But he's got Tinder open on his phone when Nathan Drake is scrolling through his phone. That's a throwaway joke that totally fell flat and was pointless. Lazy writing, not funny. I don't know. There was a couple moments that just really didn't work. Now I'll end with what I did like. Moments that I thought were good. The opening scene. Well, even this is something that I like and didn't like. Okay, real quick. What I didn't like about the opening scene is it's the sequence of Nathan, like, waking up, dangling out of the back of the cargo plane. You know, it's in the trailer. It's also straight out of Uncharted 3. Except in this movie, they're over the ocean instead of over a desert. And, you know, it opens with this crazy, hectic scene and then cuts. And then you go back to where the story begins. And then halfway through the movie, you're back on this plane and you line right back up with where this scene took place. Okay? I don't like it for the reason of just taking this awesome epic sequence from the Uncharted games and just kind of shoehorning it into your movie because people are going to go, whoa, that's the plane from Uncharted 3. But what I did like about it is it made it very reminiscent of the opening of Uncharted 2, which is one of my favorite game openers of all time, where you wake up dangling on a train, dangling off a cliff, right? And you're just like, oh my God. I mean, talk about just being thrown right into the action. You have no idea what's going on, how you got there, what, you know, but you have to get off this train. And then right when you get off the train, you know, or right as you're about to get off the train, it cuts. And then halfway through the game, you go through the sequence of the train crashing and then you have to escape again. So I liked that parallel of having that opener with this crazy sequence that you then cut away from, and then you get right back into it down the road. So that worked for me. You know, I'll take it. That was good. Puzzles, right? There were puzzles, you know, and there's this cross, there's another cross. They put the two together and they point directions and you know where to go, and then it's a key and then there's a trap and then you need to open it from, and then you put, you know, so just like that was good Uncharted stuff. And then you find, oh, it's just another clue, right? So the chase where you're never there. That was good. You know, gosh, I like that they introduced Sam, but also they could have not even had Sam in this movie and it really wouldn't have made much of a difference, I don't think. Sam is just such a strong character to come in so late in the franchise. He doesn't come in until Uncharted 4, but then he's this awesome, you know, character that adds so much layer of depth and emotion to what Nathan Drake is dealing with. And then for Sam Drake to pop up in Lost Legacy, a game that Nathan Drake's not even in, but it's with Chloe and Nadine, you know. He's a character that I feel very strongly about, and I feel like, you know, if he wasn't going to be used more in this movie, he shouldn't have been in this movie at all. But again, it was kind of set up where he might be in a sequel. If they do a sequel, man, they really set it up for a sequel. Now I really hope there's a sequel. Otherwise, this is going to be ridiculous. So I have rambled on for 45 minutes. Tyler, thank you for buying me a movie ticket and sending me to this film. I hope this video fulfills your requirement of what I had to do in exchange. It definitely felt good to get some of these thoughts off my chest. So anybody who has stuck through it to this point, let me know if you've seen the Uncharted movie, if you have any desire. Do you like the games? Do you want more Uncharted games? Do you want more Uncharted movies? Let me know. All right. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay nerdy.